Now, I'm going to introduce somebody that everybody in this room better know. If you know anything at all about Civil War history, you have seen this guy on YouTube. I probably get 20 Facebook posts from him every single day. I don't know how he does it, but he does it. He's the chief historian for the American Battlefield Trust. I've cleared out everything. We need to move the flag because when he talks, he goes like this. He's a very excitable individual. He loves history. He loves battlefield preservation. I have never seen a man so passionate about what he does. You all know who he is. I'm not going to go through a bio. Gary Adelman, Chief Historian for the American Battlefield Trust. Welcome.
Where's that clicker? Thank you so much for that, Steve. Thank you, Kevin, for that wonderful speech. And now I'm going to bring it down to the positively trite, which is my specialty. I am tasked with trying to go over at least the places in the East where all these battles were fought that resulted in this land that we preserve. So let's get going with it. If you really look at the Civil War in the East, and I'll talk about what that is later maybe, it really consists of just a few grand movements. They start outside of Washington, D.C., and fighting at the Battle of Manassas. Of course, soon after that, it's going to expand to the Shenandoah Valley. That's the Winchester, Front Royal, Kernstowns, Port Republics of the world. And of course, eventually, you're going to have Union armies, Union Army moving down the Chesapeake Bay and eventually trying to take Richmond from the east. That results in the Peninsula Campaign. That then results into the battles of the 7 days. After that, Robert E. Lee, now in command of the Confederate armies, feeling good. He takes his troops up north. They fight at Cedar Mountain. They fight at Second Manassas and Chantilly. That results in the Battle of Antietam, where Robert E. Lee will be turned back. Lee will be turned back. The seat of war moves to Fredericksburg. Battle of Fredericksburg, Battle of Chancellorsville. Then, of course, Lee's feeling good, decides to invade the north, goes through the valley, and they fight at the Battle of Gettysburg, where Lee is turned back again. And then you're going to have a slow, inexorable movement while troops are moving down from Gettysburg, eventually toward Fredericksburg and on toward Richmond and Petersburg, while you have 3rd Winchester, Cedar Creek, with Fisher's Hill and Tom's Brook in the middle there as well, and inexorably Petersburg falls, and they move out toward Appomattox. Now, I expected that to take a little longer, but nevertheless, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming out, everybody, tonight. Thank you so much. You wish. All right, we got to cover this in a tiny bit more detail. 1861. Troops gather around Washington, east and west, north and south, and they're going to have nothing to do for a while. Here they are writing letters home and sewing up their uniforms, but soon it's going to get real. They're going to fight at the greatest land battle in American history up to that time. 4,500 casualties, the Battle of Manassas or Bull Run. Stonewall becomes Stonewall. Everybody knows it'll be a long war from there. Yeah, you've got fighting out west at Wilson's Creek, as well as a battle closer to home at Ball's Bluff. Things are going well for the Confederates in general. 1862 starts out with a string of Union victories, though, all in the west. Pea Ridge, Fort Henry, Fort Donelson, the fall of Nashville. That will result eventually in the Battle of Shiloh and a fight in Corinth as well. Bloodiest battle in American history up to that time by far. 23,000 casualties, okay? In the meantime, there's fighting going on in New Mexico and Arizona. That is Fort Craig and Valverde and Peralta and the Gettysburg of the West, Glorieta Pass. But further east, you have a lot of stuff going on at the exact same time. A map that looks familiar to y'all. Of course, first Kernstown. Stonewall goes 0-1 as an army commander, but maybe a Pyrrhic victory, where you have the Union Army being a little bit more conservative as a result of Stonewall Jackson's determination and aggressiveness here at Kernstown. Of course, Gary already talked about some of the preservation opportunities over here, and it occurs to me that in these very opportunities, some of you, based on the pins you're wearing, must have gotten maybe a letter from the Trust and a letter from SVBF and a letter from KBA soliciting donations for this. So thank you all for participating in this. This can't be done without a partnership. As 1862 moves on from Kernstown, you start to have all sorts of battles around Front Royal and Winchester, and as you see, McDowell, Cross Keys, and Port Republic. Stonewall Jackson's masterful Valley Campaign of 1862. At the same time-ish, while George McClellan is moving down the Chesapeake Bay and trying to capture Richmond from the east. I'm sorry, I have a cold, so excuse my swallowing a little bit. That's going to be the Peninsula Campaign at Williamsburg, where Hancock becomes the superb, and Joe Hooker is known as Fighting Joe Hooker. In the meantime, you've got ironclads fighting at Hampton Roads, Virginia. You've got, like I said, Phil Kearny leading charges at Williamsburg, the second costliest battle in American history up to that time. It is just, everything is starting to eclipse what had come before it. Of course, there's going to be a massive battle at Fair Oaks or Seven Pines. The trust has just begun to make a little bit of progress of preserving some of this long-thought lost battlefield. Of course, the most significant thing many people think at this battle is that Joseph E. Johnston is knocked out of command. And then, of course, you have Robert E. Lee. Old Spades, Granny Lee, not going to be thought to be aggressive, will take command, and everybody was wrong about it. He lashes out against the Union armies, of course, astride the Chickahominy River or Chickahominy Swamp. They fight at Beaver Dam Creek. You know what's going to happen. They're going to fight at Gaines's Mill. They're going to fight at Glendale. And eventually, McClellan, in changing his base to further away from Richmond, will end up at Malvern Hill, which always looks much taller in every painting and drawing than it actually does when you stand there, and it barely looks like a slope. The Union takes position up there and hides under the cover of its boats. Robert E. Lee, eventually feeling confident that McClellan's not going to do anything, strikes out to the north. This is August 1862. They fight at Cedar Mountain. Stonewall Jackson almost gets beaten, but doesn't. Beaten by Nathaniel Banks. Wow. And then they're going to fight at Second Bull Run, where the Confederates really bring their wings together and practically destroy the Union force there under John Pope. And then there's going to be a less consequential battle at Chantilly right after that, which, for my part, the battlefield of Chantilly, really, along with the movie Glory, the Ken Burns series, the Gettysburg movie, the modern reenactment sort of movement in the 80s, that's when the Safe Historic Antietam Foundation was born. In the late 80s and into the 90s, that's when you have Franklin's Charge and the Georgia Battlefields Association and the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation, Central Virginia Battlefield Trust, and of course, the properly named Association for the Preservation of Civil War Sites. Man, we kept that one way too long. It is now the American Battlefield Trust. Of course, Second Bull Run leads way into Lee's first invasion of the North, where he is going to move through Maryland and threaten all sorts of places. But I think you know, one of their orders goes astray, McClellan becomes more aggressive, and that results in the Battle of Antietam, just filled with icons. September 1862. They're going to fight in the cornfield. They're going to fight at the Dunker Church. They are going to fight in a bloody lane, and all in between, they're going to fight at Burnside Bridge, and it becomes the most costly day in all of American history, in which you could argue about who won, but we know who the strategic winner was. Lincoln forecasts the Emancipation Proclamation, keeps Europe out of the war, changes the sort of aim in the war for many, and Lincoln is the victor. Now, all these things I'm starting to talk about, like I said, they're in the East, and this is, really how this works, okay? Part of Virginia, part of Pennsylvania, part of West Virginia, and most of Maryland, that's the East. And if you go south and east from Petersburg, Virginia, you're in the West, okay? If you go west of the East, you're in the West. If you go northwest of the East, you're in the West. And unfortunately for people in the West, y'all probably travel to a lot of battlefields out there, wherever the Western armies went. And during the Civil War and today, people out West are waving their arms around, hey, this is more important. This is where the war is won. This is what you have to study. And Abraham Lincoln understood that phenomenon. Here, the Union captured 100,000 square miles of Western territory. And, the Confederates come up with one ironclad warship, and it wipes out everything. It's as if it never even happened because of this Eastern focus. People have called it Virginia disease, okay? And it becomes like this, and I'll let you do the abbreviation of that if you'd like to. So you've got the East, and even worse, people just say there's the East, and then there's sort of everything else. And those poor people west of the Mississippi, it's even worse for them. We don't even talk about the Trans-Mississippi, and yet it's super important and a real land grab for the North when they start to control it. Now, As for why I focus on the East a lot is I'm a photographic guy, and you just imagine being a Civil War photographer, and you're like, okay, well, in 150 miles I could cover 8 of the top most, interesting or best known battles of the Civil War, plus 50 more right here. Or you know what, I have 7 months to spare. Let me go from Bentonville over toward Baton Rouge and up toward Westport and Lexington and things like that. It's simply where all of the reporters were, where all the photographers were, so it even conspires more to make the East sort of more this shiny object. And yet I freely admit that I think the West was more important than the East, but nonetheless, it's what people want to see. After Antietam, the seat of war moves back down toward Fredericksburg, Virginia, where Ambrose Burnside's troops famously go across this plain here, attack the sunken road. On the other side of the line, the Union has some better luck, but the Confederates hold firm. It's a huge disaster, and then they stare at each other across the river, the Rappahannock River, for a while. In the meantime, other December battles, you have Stone's River in Tennessee, you have Chickasaw Bow out in, I guess it's in the Trans-Mississippi, if it's on the other side of the river there. And in the meantime, 1863 dawns with Union and Confederate soldiers literally staring at each other, okay? This is a Union or a Northern photographer. Most of them are Northern photographers at that time. It's not like you said, ooh, there's a blockade. You know what? Forget the guns, forget the ships, forget the explosives. Bring me some wet plate chemicals so I can take more pictures, okay? There was a blockade. They couldn't get anything through, so all of these photographs are really taken by Northern photographers. But here's one showing Confederates in an active war zone across the Rappahannock River at Fredericksburg. A couple of them are even identified, okay? Staring at each other for a little while until General Joseph Hooker comes up with a pretty ingenious plan to keep the Confederates pinned at Fredericksburg while he gets behind them. This is the Chancellorsville campaign. Of course, Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson together come up with an even better plan. They completely outflank Hooker. They split into 3. Lee has maybe the zenith of his career, although he doesn't know it yet, in the Chancellorsville crossing. The Union does storm Fredericksburg just in time for some of the Lee's troops to turn around and meet them at the Battle of Sailor's Church. And of course, one of the main things that happens here is the, I don't know whether to call it mortal wounding, but the wounding and then subsequent death of Stonewall Jackson. Lee is going to have a tough time recovering from that, but he's feeling good enough after Fredericksburg, after Chancellorsville, to invade the North, okay? And there's a lot going on during this thing. You can sort of see that there's going to be the largest cavalry battle of the Civil War at Brandy Station. They're going to fight at Aldie, Middleburg, and Upperville there. In the meantime, as Gary was talking about, you got the Battle of Second Winchester here and south of us at Kernstown as well, a magnificent maneuver by the Confederates as they're going to start to move, and they're going to concentrate at Gettysburg. At Second Winchester, Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation and the Trust got together, preserved this really important property not too far from the Third Winchester battlefield. See, when you get the critical mass, I don't need to tell the people in this room, if they can see a 10-acre plot, that's one thing, but if they can see 100 acres, and then there's another 300 acres next to that, that's a whole different ballgame. People will spend a day, they can take a real deal hike, they can learn about a whole battle, so that's been very gratifying to watch. Of course, they're going to fight at Gettysburg in another series of icons. You've got the town of Gettysburg there. They're going to fight on McPherson's Ridge. They're going to fight on at the Round Tops, Devil's Den, the Wheat Field, the Peach Orchard, Cemetery Ridge, East Cemetery Hill, and Culp's Hill for 2 days. It's already the bloodiest, costliest battle of the Civil War, and then Pickett's charge is going to come across there. The Confederates will receive a beating like they didn't receive ever before that. At least in the East, and the war will go on for 2 more years. You have the dead left behind, of course, and because there's boulders there, and because photographers went there, you actually can go back and see some of those same boulders there on the Rose Farm at Gettysburg. You know, sort of really, Steve was talking about hallowed ground, Kevin was talking about it. It is. You can actually see it. And this is one of the reasons we study with, not cadaver dogs, the other name I can't remember. This is why we study maps, why we use photos, even if the photos are tough to look at. I mean, those guys had charged into battle full of life just a few days before that photo was taken, and now they're just nameless corpses. In the meantime, affecting the East, of course, is The fall of Vicksburg, the Confederacy is literally cut in two. They can no longer get beef slaves and salt across there. They're going to have to do those things out of Florida, which is tough with the blockade going on there. Changes the whole course of the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln goes to Gettysburg and tries to deliver a new meaning, a way forward during the Civil War in the Gettysburg Address. A new birth of freedom, he will call it, and sometimes recognized as the greatest of any speech made by any American president. Often skipped over after Gettysburg is the Bristow campaign, the Mine Run campaign. They don't come to a whole lot, so people don't talk about them. This is October and November and into December of 1863, but the year closes inconclusively, of course, as we get to the year where, man, it made everything else look like a warm-up exercise. 1864, while you have 5 grand movements, spanning from the Red River in Texas back toward Richmond, and here, of course, in the Shenandoah Valley, you really focus on the big movements of Sherman toward Atlanta and U.S. Grant's Army group toward Richmond, okay? And that's what it's really going to come down to try to force an end to this thing. Of course, it's going to start in May. They're going to cross the Rapidan River at Germanna. You actually have photos of the armies crossing. You have these war correspondents now actually with the soldiers and covering them like the photo documentarians we now have today. They're going to fight a terrible battle at the Wilderness. You know what's going to happen. Grant and Lee facing each other. It's no surprise these guys had ended up at the top. They have that set of skills, not the same set, but enough skills to manage an army, to see tactically and strategically, to communicate well, and to inspire their troops. And they're going to battle it out on this line every day in contact for 10 whole months. And importantly, to keep that going, Grant does not go back to Washington after the loss or stalemate in the Wilderness. He's going to go after Robert E. Lee. He's going to turn to the south, and that results in fighting at Todd's Tavern. Then at the terrible Battle of Spotsylvania, 32,000 more casualties added to the rolls. And if you go in there, the dead are all over the battlefield. The wounded are piling up in hospitals. Now, I'd rather be wounded in 1864 than in 1861. By then, both sides had made great strides in trying to systematize where hospitals were, where field hospitals and aid stations were, who did what, triage and trauma, and you would have been in a much better position, except that into some of these hospitals, you literally have 100 wounded coming into the Marie's Heights Hospital at Brompton at more than 100 a day for 2 weeks. Okay, just as you're treating the people that come in, here come 100 more. And sometimes there were 6 or 7 surgeons in the whole place. Few of whom had a medical, actually, degree here. Of course, during this time, there's so much happening at once. This is Grant's plan. Stretch out and attack in so many places that you can't possibly parry them all. The Confederates do a pretty good job, especially in a field where people lose a lot of shoes. At Newmarket, man, is this film beloved. Everywhere I go, if you talk about Gettysburg and glory, they're going to bring up the field of lost shoes. Confederates win an unlikely victory there. And there are so many things, and SVBF does this so well on their website. There's so many actions beyond the main ones that I'm talking about here. I encourage you to learn a little bit more about some of these other actions, but they're happening while the siege of Petersburg is going on, while the Battle of Cold Harbor is going on. It's so hard to keep it all straight, but for some people, the Battle of Lynchburg, that was their Civil War. It might have been their only fight, what they wrote about, where they lost their friend. So it's all more than worthwhile. Of course, this terrible overland campaign will continue on past North Anna and Hawes Shop and Cold Harbor and Totopotomoy, just fighting that neither army had ever seen before. Just tens and tens of thousands of casualties racking up. Neither army is the same as it was 6 weeks earlier. Grant steals a march around Lee after fighting the Battle of Cold Harbor. Let me go back to a couple things here. Engineers building a military road at North Anna River. This is Jericho Mill in the background. The road is still there. We stood there on the same spot. I was actually able to put the trust president. This was 5 years before he became president. We didn't know. In fact, I was going for the job too. But that's trust president David Duncan standing there supervising us all. Little did I know I'd be reporting to the guy before too long. But we have preserved that, and it is now in the hands of the National Park Service. Hopefully they'll open it up someday. Battle of Cold Harbor, absolutely awful. As you know, in the meantime, there's river fighting. We literally have minesweepers in the James River. You can see them trying to protect this monitor ship by sweeping from mines. Warfare was getting much more like something that we would recognize by this point. Of course, there's going to be a siege at Petersburg. Before it was a siege, they tried to capture it. The Union squandered some opportunities by all accounts, and eventually they're going to bring in big siege guns like the Dictator. And in the meantime, Robert E. Lee, desperate to do anything, detaches some of his army, sends them down the Shenandoah Valley, eventually toward Frederick, Maryland, where in July of 1864 you have the battle that saved Washington. Jubal Early wins, but Lew Wallace, future author, will pull off an incredible delaying action that slows down Early's men just long enough. And a photo that I took in, I think, 2008 at the Monocacy Junction, that's an 1880s photo, or 1890s. I mean, you can still see this track, but look, the stains, it seems, from the previous track are still there, okay? So which is one of the reasons I like to look at photos, of course. Now, while Early's coming back, some of those actions I already showed you on the board, as well as, of course, the Battle of Second Kernstown. This is going to be a mirror image of the other one. The Confederates actually have more troops this time, where Jubal Early is able to really outflank and whip soldiers under George Crook on some of the same ground, most of the same ground, where the first two actions took place. They're just unbelievable there. You can see the puzzle pieces coming together. I talked about critical mass. Look how much land is being preserved there. In the meantime, U.S. Grant is trying to attack both sides of the James River, of course. So in order to stretch Lee out down there, he attacks north of the James. First deep bottom, second deep bottom, while attacking at the Crater and the Weldon Railroad. The Union makes gains at both of these, but can't quite hold on to any gains there. Eventually, they're going to blow up a massive crater at Petersburg, the saddest event of the war because, just poor communication. They went right into the crater, some of them. They never really went on toward their objective, and we have another icon of the Civil War born. Of course, in the meantime, Jubal Early doesn't make it all the way to Washington. Well, he probably sets foot in it, but Lincoln gets shot at, might be called a damn fool at that point, and then goes back toward the Valley, and I think you know what's going to happen. It's going to make the first Valley campaign look like another warm-up exercise where each one of the biggest battles, like Winchester and Cedar Creek, comprise more casualties than Jackson's entire Valley campaign. The war had really changed by now, and I really like this place. I came to the Civil War Preservation Trust at the time through this battlefield when I was asked to help interpret the place. This is how I met the Shenandoah Valley Battlefields Foundation as well, and it's a great place. It's been great to watch what SVBF does over there, and more land and more trails. Of course, what's going to happen here is that Phil Sheridan, who has more cavalry than his enemy even has infantry, not a good recipe for success for Early, sends them whirling through Winchester. There's going to be a fight at Fisher's Hill where, when you have such a much larger army, you can outflank them rather easily. They're going to fight at Tom's Brook and then at Cedar Creek, where sometimes veterans would go back and you could pose at Belle Grove, and Early's force basically ceases to exist after that chaotic retreat there, so Grant can really focus on Petersburg. He's going to attack north of the James again at Newmarket Heights and Fort Harrison, making some gains just in time for the 1864 election, of course. What's going on in the Shenandoah Valley, what's going on north of Richmond in the fall of Atlanta. Lincoln is reelected, and you really have little hope for the Confederacy at this point. But the death toll is just stacking up day after day, and Confederates are starting to leave the Army 10, 20, 50 a day from even Lee's Army, where they felt pretty good. They're going to fight at Weldon Railroad, Boyd and Plank Road, as Grant tries to cut off all of Lee's supplies into Petersburg. Eventually, after battles like White Oak Road and Five Forks, he will break through the Confederate line, and eventually that will compromise it. Petersburg will fall, Richmond will fall, and Lee will start to flee westward onto open ground. He's actually a little bit happy at first because he can finally operate. He's not besieged like he had been for the last 9 months. And of course, they're going to fight at places like Sailor's Creek, where a quarter of his army is captured. He says, "My God, is the army of Northern Virginia dissolved?" These are sad days for the Confederacy. While they're going to fight up high on and below High Bridge, they're going to fight at Appomattox Station. They're going to fight at Appomattox Courthouse. And you, of course, know what's going to happen there the next day. Just 1 week after the breakthrough at Petersburg, Lee will surrender to Grant on April 9th. It's not the last surrender, but it's the effective end of the Civil War for many people. Once Lee's army is gone, it's over. Richmond will burn, as Confederates try to keep supplies out of Union hands. They re-raise the flag at Fort Sumter on April 14, 1865. And on that day in Richmond's town square, This is right at George Washington's statue right near the State House. There's Union Confederate soldiers maybe not quite fraternizing, but having an uneasy peace. But this date this photo was taken is April 14th, 1865. I think that date sounds familiar. That's when Lincoln decides to go to the theater yet again. And I think you know what happens. You've got my American cousin there. There is Laura Keene in a hand-colored photograph showing her charming self. And she'll be on stage, of course, when John Wilkes Booth goes into the Lincoln box, sneaks up behind him right through a door over there, shoots the president, stabs the Lincoln guest, jumps onto the stage, yells something like "Sic Semper Tyrannis," runs out the back door, and Lincoln is brought across the street where he will expire the following morning. Incredibly, there's an amateur photographer staying in this house, the Peterson house. Y'all have been there, many of you have probably been there and stood in that tiny room there. And he took 2 photos of it, including the blood-stained pillow. But artists were captivated by this, so they wanted to show Lincoln's deathbed scene. Okay, we got Montgomery Meigs, we're going to have Henry Halleck there. Hold on, wait. We have to have the Secretary of War in there. The room needs to be a little bit bigger. We need to expand that thing out a little bit. Oh my God, how can we forget this person and that person needs to be a little bit bigger, and Stan needs to be more front. Oh my God, how can we forget Robert Todd Lincoln? I mean, we really need to have it. And things just started getting really out of hand. It's just really, it's just the rubber room. That's Harold Holzer came up with this thing. It is just crazy watching the wallpaper stay the same in the bed, and everything else changed. In the meantime, Robert E. Lee, in proud indignation, puts on his uniform again on April 20th, 1865. This is behind his Richmond home. You can go there. I'm sure a lot of you have gone there. If you call the place, it's now a family foundation, I believe. You can go, same brick, same crack in the door. So the first time you go, you shake yourself off and think, okay, I'm Robert E. Lee. I'm going to get this right on the first shot. Okay, so you look at him, see where he's standing, and oh yeah, you just nailed it. You look just like Robert E. Lee. Eventually, you try it about 20 more times, and then someone lends you a Confederate coat, and you get it a little bit closer, okay? This is about 20 years ago, but then you start refining it. You bring your own Robert E. Lee with you, and you take selfies with your Robert E. Lee at the door there, okay? In the meantime, of course, Richmond is not an upper for the Confederates. The Union imprisons Confederates in their own Libby prison. They take the president and lock him up at Fort Monroe, Jefferson Davis. Pose your loser friend in the same spot if you ever care to. They've got a casemate well preserved there. And of course, you've got a few final acts in the drama, including the hanging of the Lincoln conspirators, somewhere you can go on occasion outside Washington. And what are we left with, of course? But not just the hallowed ground, but just the mountains of dead. Whether you say 620,000 or 800,000, it is just too many, and there's never been anything like it. But the ground that they were in is forever changed. Of course, photographers go in and try to add their meaning to it. Not just the reporters, but the photographers themselves, capturing in one moment, maybe. I don't know if you can capture a more meaningful photo than this. Recently freed, black, I don't know if they were soldiers or African Americans, in front of the ruins of the capital city of the Confederacy, all at once just showing you really the result of this war. There's going to be a grand review in Washington, D.C. They're going to march. They're going to march by the executive mansion in a blur. And I just looked at the other side of the negative of this photo and started seeing all sorts of interesting things. Here's people just gazing off. Oh my God, there's the remnant of the Iron Brigade. There's this person. There's that unit. All these units they've been reading about in the papers are suddenly visible to people. But right here, you just see something unbelievable. With the blur of the cavalry moving by in front of some veteran Reserve Corps troops, you have Eli Parker on Grant's staff. You have U.S. Grant looking right back at the camera. Edwin Stanton right here in profile, the Secretary of War. The new president, Andrew Johnson. Cavalry commander Wesley Merritt. George Gordon Meade, bespectacled and looking back toward the camera. Commander of the Army of the Potomac. Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Wells. William T. Sherman with a white glove whispering to a guy named Dennison, and Montgomery Meigs, the quartermaster of the United States. I don't know of any picture from any other time that has the president, as well as the commanders of the principal armies, the Secretary of the Navy, and the Secretary of the War, as well as so many others. And I just noticed it because I looked at the other side of the negative. I don't have anything special skills that allow me to look at a picture at the Library of Congress more than y'all, so I would encourage you to look at these photos, download them, and I think you'll find things that will be of interest to you. Of course, after the war, a bunch of amendments will provide new freedoms and guarantees for what they're worth at the time. You're going to have people trying to make sense of all the dead. They're going to go to cemeteries. Veterans are going to found newspapers, march in parades, form groups, and they're going to go to battlefields and dedicate monuments on those battlefields. Ones that we can, of course, go back to today, including this one in Bull Run or Manassas. And eventually the 1930s come around. You have the last great reunion of the blue and the gray in 1938. This is amazing to me while they're doing this. You have 1,800 of them, like I said. The people who planned the dedication of the event in Gettysburg were happy and satisfied that only 7 of these veterans died when they came to the last winter reunion. Their average age was 94. It was a hot day. But here I'm looking at some of these veterans up at the Peace Light Memorial. I see a motion picture camera. Some of these were in color. If you read about that day, there were tanks, there were planes flying overhead. Civil War soldiers saw TV. Civil War soldiers lived through 2 world wars, some of them at least, okay? I have met and shook the hand of more than 100 people that shook the hand of Civil War veterans. I only missed the last one by 11 years. It wasn't that long ago. It is my job and the job of all the history nerds in this room to drag the past forward so it just doesn't seem like it was that long ago, because it wasn't. I have been to 1/5 of all of the Battle of Gettysburg anniversaries of all time. Okay, maybe before I die, I'll be to 1/3 of them. We shall see. Of course, what we have, like I said, in After Glory, Gettysburg, Ken Burns, the reenactor movement, all of these preservation groups formed, and the trust cannot do what it does. Here, I don't have great maps for the valley, so excuse me, we got Glendale, which was 2 acres in 1987. This is what it is now. Almost the whole battlefield is preserved. You look at a place a lot like Perryville, which had 310 acres and is now almost completely preserved or substantially preserved. And I have such good hopes for what's going to continue to happen in Virginia, despite the challenges, despite how happy we would be to pay only $4 million for the property that Gary was talking about now, because as Kevin knows, my God, the prices have just skyrocketed. And we can't, the trust as a national group can't do it without regional groups like SDBF and CVBT, and with the local groups like Franklin's Charge or Battle of Franklin Trust, and of course the KBA, for which I can only use one word for touring the battlefield for real today for the first time. I had been a part of the battlefield, but I went out with Larry today. The only word I can use is impressed. I come across a lot of preservation groups that would be pleased to do 1/5 as much as KBA has done in the last decade. So my hat's off to all y'all for everything that you're doing as we remember, you know, that we are just like the people of the past. I don't think I need to convince the people in this room how similar we are to these people who are gazing back at the camera during the Grand Review. And since this is an Eastern talk, of the 60,000 acres the Trust has been able to preserve, 28,000 of them have been in this thing that I define as the East. And again, we couldn't do it without you. Thank you all for everything you do for KDA, SDBF, ABT, and of course for battlefield preservation, education, and inspiration. That was all one sentence. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Gary?
I'm good on Star Wars too. By the way, I want to say that I'm really excited to be in this room with so many titans of preservation, but I'm unnerved by all the runners in the room. My kids, they run 100 miles a week between them at high school cross country, and that's made me a runner. You know, if you have kids that are runners, then you have to run too, and so it's a little bit, it's a little unnerving, so well done, y'all, especially because you're at that higher level. I will take a couple questions if Steve tells me I have time.
Can you start over at March 62 again?
Let me tell you about the Battle of Pea Ridge. Okay. I'll give him the mic. He's got the humor. Okay, don't give him the mic. Or maybe you're saying don't take any questions, we want to go. Because I am standing between you and the 50-50. I'll be here offline if you have any questions. Thanks so much for having me.
I know it's getting late. I'm going to bring up one more person. While he's talking,